Well, good evening all, and can I start by saying how delighted I am to welcome everybody here this evening. This is indeed an august gathering, and as I look around the room, I see the great and the good of the planning and development world here in Jersey. I was trying earlier to think of a collective noun for planners, and while a couple of few choice words came to mind, I settled on a very politically correct panorama of planners. Panorama, an extended visual representation providing a wide view of a landscape or other scene. And we certainly have a broad landscape of all things planning here this evening. Indeed, all we need is an independent planning inspector and the bailiff, and we could come up with a concept, some detail, legal representation. We could take it through an application, through an approval, planning committee, do an appeal, and no doubt end up with a judicial review. In a month that saw the King and the Queen visit us here in Jersey, it's great to be able to welcome yet a few more royals. I'm really grateful to Alexis Edwards, the chair of the Southwest branch of the Town Planning Institute, Royal Town Planning Institute, for having included Jersey in the RTPI President's Tour of the Regions. And in this respect, I would extend the warmest of Jersey welcomes, not only to Alexis, but also to the Royal Town Planning Institute President, Lindsey along with Charlotte, the Southwest Branch Coordinator, who makes all these things happen. To you three particularly, welcome to Jersey. We're very pleased to have you visit the island, and I hope you found your visit here to be of interest. We're sorry that you didn't enjoy better weather, but at least you could look at the buildings close to you and not the scenery that you couldn't see further away. I'd been hoping at this point to be welcoming our neighbours from the Guernsey Planning Department, but the weather too has got the better of us all. But I will say, even in their absence, that I'd like to see, and I'm keen to encourage, more joint learning and exchanges between our islands. I'm sure we have many similar challenges, but there's also many opportunities to work better together for both our communities. I'm also pleased to welcome some of my fellow states members who contribute to planning in Jersey through their work on the Planning Committee, including Chairman Constable Swir. It's a mighty difficult job, and whilst we, and I count myself in their numbers, may not be professional planners, we recognise and experience firsthand the challenges of the discipline, but I know that we're also all aware of the benefits that a political perspective can sometimes bring to the planning process. We're fortunate in Jersey to also have professional planners working outside of government, and many are here tonight bringing their own considerable expertise to the island's development industry. I'm pleased to see them here alongside other development professionals, all of which engage with the island's process through their daily work in planning. Jersey planning is never far from the top of the news agenda. The decisions that shape our island are of great interest to many residents and businesses. Planning has also become of great interest lately in the UK, especially after the recent general election, with all major parties proposing changes to planning policies and planning systems, most especially in the housing sector. The language used in most debates about planning is, however, unfortunately negative. Planning is often construed as a hurdle to be gotten over, unnecessary red tape, a burden and a brake to growth. Let's face it, planning gets blamed for most things. This is, in my view, both an unfortunate and an inaccurate representation of the purpose and value of planning. Not many professions get such a rough ride for doing such a good job. And we are doing a good job. At a recent meeting with all my government planners, I was at pains to point out to them that I, for one, understand that their task is difficult, tough, and almost never unchallenged. I understand that in order to do a good job, it's impossible to please everyone, and it's all too often a thankless task. For every happy recipient of a planning approval is often an unhappy neighbour, and balancing the many and various policies of the Bridging Island Plan can indeed be daunting. As I hope you will have heard today, I'm keen to improve further our planning service here in Jersey to be even more efficient and effective, and I want to do all I can to help address all those perceptions and challenges that I've just spoken about. I want us all, and I mean all of us in this room, to continue to play a positive role in making our island a better place to be in, to live in, and to visit. And on that note, I'm really pleased to invite Lindsey, our President, to expand on this and to discuss what the RTPI and the planning profession can do for our communities. Thank you.
Minister, those words are often go unheard elsewhere from elected members, so that's really great and really positive to hear that, and I know that your planners will welcome that those supportive words. So thank you for inviting me, and thank you for allowing Guernsey and Jersey to be part of the South West Tour. The presidential year and the highlight for the President is really actually meeting local members, our chartered members, our associate members, our legal members, and actually meeting those local members on the tour and in our region. So it means a lot to me. So it's been great. It's been great to visit the island of Jersey. And as you say, Minister, it's a shame that the colleagues from Guernsey were not able to join us. Today, I've had an absolutely full day. Despite the weather, I've seen some absolutely fantastic examples of projects, places, and I've heard about great people. I've seen the assembly rooms. I've seen an amazing central market. I've seen Millennium Urban Park, which actually provides space to relax, and it contributes to the well-being. And actually within those public spaces, I've seen actually a lot of public art. And this is placemaking. And actually maybe you don't appreciate what you have here on the island, because I've been walking around with my jaw open and actually really appreciating what I've seen today. And I think Jersey is really pushing above its weight. And what I say in my presentation, when I talk to you, you will like some of what I say. You might not like all of what I say, and actually some of it might well be very painful to hear, but it's actually a true reflection of where we are in planning, the planning profession, and actually a lot of it is fact, and a lot of it is out of the research from the RTPI. And my role as president, so I started my presidential year in January 2024. And generally, as presidents, we have a theme which we go with. And my theme actually was around supporting a pipeline of young planners, of coming into the profession and actually recognising what a great career it is. But in fact, actually, I've built and it's changed on that, because the more we've come up into the election and the more we've been through discussions and ideas around planning reform and actually the consequences of that, and actually the more I've seen headlines, the negative headlines we experienced, then actually my theme has evolved, because actually our members need more support than they've ever had to do for quite some time. But it is actually a really interesting time to be a planner. So, you know, despite what I say in terms of, I would say planning is in a crisis, and in fact, when I was putting together my presidential inauguration speech, I started looking at past speeches of previous presidents. And I went back to 2012, when in the UK, the NPPF, the National Planning Policy Guidance Framework, was introduced. And at that time, the President said, actually, planning is in a crisis. And then I went back years from that, and planning was still in a crisis 20 years ago. I said in my speech, planning is really in a big crisis. We're actually in a real turning point. So it's exciting time with UK having a new government, but actually it's a challenging time as well for a number of areas which I will talk about. What I'm going to talk about is, in effect, the UK, the England context. But actually I know in Jersey and in Guernsey that actually many of the issues and many of the challenges and actually many of the opportunities align with the experiences that we have here in Jersey. And it's not, as I say, it's not a recent conundrum in terms of planning and actually the contribution that planning makes, because it feels like we've been under attack for quite some time. And we can go back to the days of, it may not mean anything to you, but it was one of our housing ministers, Eric Pickles, who talked about planning being a drag anchor on economic growth. And we also had David Cameron, I think it was when he was our Prime Minister, describe planning officials as enemies of enterprise. And actually more recently, we had Keir Starmer, now our Prime Minister, last year at the Labour Party conference, talked about the need to bulldoze through planning. That was quite incredible, because actually an earlier session I'd been listening to Matthew Pennycook, who is now our minister. He's really positive, and he gets planning, he understands it. He talks to many of our members. And so it's actually really uplifting to actually hear from our minister and now from actually our Prime Minister on this. So my role as the planning president is the face of planning. It's there to be the ambassador, and it's here. And I feel a duty to actually challenge and call out and actually, in a way, represent our 27,000 members. Now, those 27,000 members, roughly 50-50 are private-public sector. And actually, roughly 44% or so are female, and the remainder are male. So actually, we've got a pretty good gender balance. And actually, that's really positive compared to some of our other built environment professionals, such as RICS and REBA, who have about half of the representation of women in the profession. So we're in a really good position. And the reason I mention about gender balance is around having actually a diverse workforce and bringing in many different thoughts and different contributions. And actually that goes for also not just sort of sticking with planning as an undergraduate route into planning, but bringing many planners, many future planners from other disciplines and actually through the master's postgraduate course. In the UK, we estimate that we have 22,000 planners. It's not a huge number. And as I mentioned, about 50-50 of those are in the public and private sector. But actually, more worrying, the number of planners working in the public sector has shrunk by a quarter in the UK between 2013 and 2020. And actually, those planners have generally gone into the private sector. And actually, many of those, and some of those planners have actually moved out of the profession altogether. And again, there's reasons for that. And when we start looking at the remuneration of planners in real terms, so salaries have actually seen a sharp decline. And if salaries had followed inflation since 2005, again in the UK, the median planner should actually be making close to £50,000. And in effect, it's £33,000. So that's one of the many areas why we see a shift of actually mid-career planners moving from public to private sector. And when we start looking at local authority net expenditure on planning, this has actually fallen 43% from 844 million in 2009 and 10 to 480 million in 2020-21. And in the UK, that is just 4.5% of local government budgets allocated to planning services. And in fact, in the UK, planning fees are not ring-fenced, and in fact, planning fees are more often used to actually subsidise the very necessary expenditure on social services. It's a really difficult position. And I mentioned that actually where we see a shift from public to private sector, Many of those, as I've said, are actually mid-career planners. And the issue with that is they are taking their experience, their skill set, their knowledge, and actually the ability to mentor and bring on young early planners. They're taking that with them. And actually those are exactly the planners that we need to deal with the more complex applications and actually to deal with the challenging strategies and the local plan work that we need to undertake. So, what does all this mean for the planning profession, the planning services? And in fact, the RTPI undertook we undertake regular surveys of the profession. And the last survey that was undertaken was last year, and this is the State of the Profession report. And I'm just going to summarise some of it. So it talks about the administration of planning services at local authority level became more difficult over the last decade. And this is caused by a combination of lower levels of funding for planning services and an expansion of the range of duties for the planning system. And these difficulties have worsened the performance of the planning system, driven contraction of the public sector and expansion of the private sector, and have kept the salaries of planners down, making planning less attractive as a profession for young people. And efforts over the past 3 years to institute planning reform have added to these challenges, creating an uncertain, rapid, shifting policy environment. So, in summary, what we find is the difficulty to hire and to retain planning talent, worsening working conditions. And actually what I haven't mentioned is harassment and mistreatment from the public. And also on top of that, the spread of disinformation, of misinformation as well. So it's all a pretty dismal picture. And I make no apology for that. I make no apology for that because actually it's about reality and it's about understanding where we are and actually trying to address these shortcomings. So what do we see? The common perceptions of the planning service, and as we see it in the headlines, is around planning delays, poor service, inconsistencies in approach, and actually inconsistencies in interpretation of policy. We also hear about planning officers not being accessible, not having the time, and actually they're not being community facing. We also know about misinformation, and actually there's a wider issue here around actually the lack of understanding of the planning role. We know what we do, but actually many of the people outside don't. And then also, I'm sorry to say, it's the politicalisation of planning, increasingly more so as well. So we see vacancies not filled, we see increased workloads. So we see additional duties coming onto planning, such as biodiversity net gain, nutrient neutrality. You know, we see an increased workload, but what we don't see is the increasing resources. And that in itself also means that actually many of our planners lack training, they lack the time for training, and they don't undertake the continuous development and evolution and understanding of planning. So actually, and what we have seen in more recent times is more focus on procedures and regulatory approach than actually what planning is. And planning is a creative, dynamic profession. It's problem solving, and actually it's based around lots of the use of softer skill set. You know, we need and good communication. So I would say at the moment, it's almost like, it feels to me as though we are expecting to run a car without putting the petrol in. We're running on an empty tank. And actually in the UK, we have seen no end of references to planning reforms and about the need to streamline the planning system. It's not perfect. I would agree it's not perfect. But actually in the RTPI, what we say is actually reforms aren't necessary. We feel as planners we have the toolkit that we need. We just don't have the resources to actually implement it and use it efficiently and actually, more importantly, effectively, and have that time to actually talk to our communities and spend time explaining why decisions are made. So actually, there's something here actually which we need to all remember about planning and why we came into planning. And even if we're in the public sector or the private sector, planning is about the public good. It's about making provision and making sure that actually we address the public good. And in doing that, we think about economic, social and environmental issues, and we give them the weight, the deserved weight in coming to those decisions, or actually coming to those recommendations where our members make those decisions. And I think also the importance of social, economic and sustainability is really about the social purpose. So that's a localised objective to support strong, vibrant and healthy communities. That's really key in planning. And then actually something we've heard more about recently is about the economic purpose and about the economy and growing the economy. And actually this is to make sure that actually there's enough and sufficient land of the right type is available to support economic growth, innovation and actually help to improve productivity. And then we come to sustainability, which is about achieving the efficient use of our natural resources, energy, and encouraging sustainable modes of transport. So as I say, actually we put all those together, and actually that's talking about a career and a profession which is creative, problem solving, forward thinking, absolutely collaborative, not just within planners, but actually across the whole built environment, but also with our communities. And actually, I would say it's a profession that should be and is delivery focused. And actually, I would say we are the bedrock for economic growth. But actually, since 2010, we have been known as the austerity planner. And that's because it's become the norm, really, to have limited use of resources. We've had those vacancies, and actually this issue around politicalisation of planning. And in 2019, the RTPI published a report which reminded us all about the purpose of planning, and it was entitled Serving the Public Interest. And in that report, it talks about planning having little room for being, the proactive planning and independently executing our professional judgment. And there is something there around eroding both job satisfaction and the interest in critical reflection. As planners, we were seen in that time in 2019 to actually be highly mobile, having a tendency to move jobs and organisations rapidly in the pursuit of more pay and experience, and of course, for the public good. But this may come at the expense of building long-term relationships with customers, places, colleagues, and actually maintaining that momentum in a planning service in the public sector. The austerity planners' propensity to base their career choices on where they want to work, as much as for whom, is having a polarising effect on service delivery. That's very damning, and I'm sorry to start all that in a very sort of negative way. And actually, the new government in the UK has actually put a new focus on planning. And when we heard the King's speech, in the first few paragraphs, in fact, actually, it might be in the first few sentences, there was reference to planning and the association and the need to make sure that planning supports economic growth. So, the Labour government are very vocal, they're very supportive, and actually our chief exec was called in or invited in to speak to the planning minister the third day of the new government. So that, to us, speaks volumes in terms of how they will support our profession and actually the support that they want from our profession. And in the RTPI, we were preparing ourselves ahead of the general election, and we put together what we called the Planifesto. And that was something that we rolled out at the party conferences last year. And that was the ask of any new government. And the first ask we asked was, we want you to fund councils to deliver high quality planning services. And we would also like a chief planner in each local authority. And a chief planner there would ensure a vision for a place and actually ensuring that corporate priorities and strategic objectives are part of that more holistic approach across that local authority. And actually, a chief planner will, of course, ensure resources. And there were other asks around strengthening local plans and empowering local communities, and then also around plan for net zero. So the new Labour government have promised us 300 new planners. That's great. We keep saying we want a zero on the end of that, and that might make up the area. And actually, the other question we ask is, well, actually, where are they coming from? Because actually, growing planners isn't something that just happens overnight. And actually, we don't want to take them out of the private sector. We don't want to be it's just effectively moving deck chairs around. So we need to be thinking about growing the pipeline and actually encouraging young people into the profession and making it an early career choice. And I think it goes back to the point, Minister, you made around headlines and those negative headlines and all the negative around planning. Because if that continues, then actually why would our young professionals or our young people want to make planning a career choice? Who would actually want to be a planner when all the headlines are so negative about actually the rubbish job we do, when actually we know it's not? So we need to be encouraging people to come into the profession, and that means having a positive spin on it. And it means about celebrating actually what we do and what we achieve. And I know the architectural awards that you undertake here in Jersey actually showcase some of the actual planning excellence and some of the design excellence. And that needs promoting beyond the profession and beyond us in this room. It needs actually shouting about in the communities to say, this is actually what we achieve and this is what we contribute and this is actually the difference that we make. So we are quite clear in the UK, and actually you're quite clear here in Jersey in terms of the value that placemaking and planning can contribute. So we in the RTPI, 2 or 3 weeks ago, we actually published a report which is about the value of planning, and it's about the economic value of planning. And in that report, there are actually some huge figures about the contribution that positive placemaking and planning can have on places, and actually can realise in terms of economic value and monetary value. And in that report, Victoria Hills, who's our chief exec, writes, we need a more proactive planning system that properly values the strength of our communities and property markets, including their economic and social benefits over a long term. And we feel that this has the right to unlock both the volume and the quality at the same time. Now, what we don't know about the current government, our new government, is actually the emphasis they are putting on in terms of design quality. So we hear a lot about housing delivery, but to date we haven't heard about where quality is placed. And in recent years, we've seen what was MHCLG became DLUC and now back at MHCLG. So this is our government department actually produce national design guidance, and then follow that up with actually guidance on what a design coding should be. And then the creation of the Office of Place. So there's been a real focus in terms of the value of placemaking and actually how we should be contributing and building communities that actually work and function well. And Nicholas Boyd-Smith talks about beauty quite often. It's quite hard to interpret, but actually we're creating beautiful places. So we have seen in the UK quite an emphasis in terms of quality. And that for me is actual relief, because when we saw reference to Eric Pickles, and I was working in a government agency at the time, at that time it was all about housing numbers, and the actual standards for housing went out the window. So actually creating those communities and actually places which function and look and work well is actually much on the emphasis in terms of really good urban design principles. But when you start asking some of our planning professionals around the skills that they have, so the skills and the knowledge that they have to deliver those places, 61% of them say they feel they have the skills and the knowledge. It's not actually enough. But actually, those 61% say actually they haven't got the capacity to really apply it and to really drive those standards. And then more often than not, we actually see issues of value engineering. So actually what developers, landowners, and what we as planners expect to be built will then become actually less and less. And that really has impact on the communities, because we say as professionals, this is what will be delivered, but actually on the ground it isn't. But actually to prevent that takes time, takes resources, takes good negotiation skills, and we need to make sure that actually we have those resources to prevent that. So I just wanted to quickly touch on in terms of design codes in the UK. And there's a requirement in the UK at the moment for area-wide design codes. Really challenging. It's really challenging in terms of resourcing that. But also, for me, it seems questionable whether or not areas need a complete area-wide design code. But actually, the requirements for design codes have actually got the outcomes and really positive things at their heart. So we have seen a real movement around good quality design. And in fact, our planning inspectorate are supporting us in that in terms of turning down poor schemes. So we need to empower planners to be able to say, actually, it's just not good enough. And again, I come back to the fact that actually those negotiations and making sure that applications once submitted are actually of really good, high quality before they're actually submitted, because negotiating them whilst they're in is actually time consuming. And I've seen your figures on performance, and they're very impressive. They're really impressive compared to the UK. And what I would say on that is just be careful, because actually it's not just about performance and about dealing with applications in 8 weeks, 12 weeks. I know that's what the performance figures are, but it's about getting those quality outcomes and making sure that actually they are quality decisions. So well done in your performance, and actually it's been a great trajectory, but actually that has to be balanced against those quality schemes to be delivered and knowing that we've done the best that we can. So what I would say, just to round up, in terms of my experience here in Jersey and actually seeing it in Guernsey, I've seen some really bold, creative developments. I've been really pleased in terms of what I see, because actually I think you are way ahead of the UK. I think there's been some really inspiring schemes. There are challenges. I know there are issues around net connectivity. And actually, you've used land reclamation really, really well in terms of being able to provide grade A office accommodation. And actually, that allows you to sort of protect and actually have a different treatment for your city centre. It really works, and it's actually a great place to walk around. So actually, all in all, I think coming back to planning and why we're here and for the public good, it is around creating those places that we're proud of. And that's where we need to be saying, actually, this is what we do, this is what we create. And we do need our communities to understand more about what we do. So I would say to you that when we see the negative headlines, and actually 2 weeks ago we experienced that in the UK in the Times paper, it needs calling out. And we need everybody to act together. Because if we don't address the issues and the challenges of resourcing and actually training and having that time in our public sector, then you know in the private sector that actually that impacts your clients. So I think we need to come together to actually shout about the profession and actually support each other. And no, because ultimately we've all got shared objectives. We all, I think, want the shared outcomes. Might be slightly different on those applications. But ultimately, we're here for the public good, and our communities deserve that. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Lindsay. That was a very thoughtful and provocative and interesting presentation, so thank you very much for that. We have got a little time for questions, and I think the Minister and Lindsay are happy to take questions. So I don't know if anyone has any questions that they would like to pose. I can see Deputy War. I think we might have a mic.
That's a great speech, and I was just saying to my colleague here, it's refreshing to have somebody from outside bigging up Jersey and what's going on in Jersey, because we do beat ourselves up an awful lot, so it's a case in point. My question really is, and it's something fascinating me, is I'm reading a book at the moment called Around Loneliness, about the loneliest century, and how we've seen the atomization of society. We're seeing in Jersey building a lot of one-bedroom flats, and that's where the big demand is for. And obviously, these are new communities being built, public spaces. You know, it's this kind of, this overarching view that you're not just building a home, you're building a community, you're building the public space, the public environment. I don't know if you can expand on that at all, in, you know, that encourages active travel, because one of the things with an aging population is that people end up stuck in their own homes. They don't come out, they don't talk to people, and as we know, loneliness is one of the biggest killers. So tell me, as a planner, what do you need to do, or what should we be encouraging our community to be doing?
It's sustainable, isn't it? It's about having a mix in terms of the community and mixed uses, and actually access to open space. You know, we have is it Millennium Park? You know, that's a lovely space, and it's not actually that massive, but it should be allowing access to open spaces, mixed uses, and actually, you know, public transport, and areas where people feel safe to go out. And so I'm thinking about the elderly, but I'm also thinking about young girls. In the UK, we have quite a movement at the moment to start considering. We talk about gender-sensitive design, and it's about making places safe for young girls, where they feel safe. But you know, we ought to be thinking about all elements, all parts of the community, and just making sure that there are places locally where they're able to go. So again, in the UK, we talk about the 15-minute city. It's actually been hijacked by sort of lobby groups and given it a different meaning. But actually that's about having, you know, a normal mix. I say normal. What we would like to see is a mixed use within a certain parameter of people's homes, so they can get all their essential provisions. They can meet, you know, in parks, in cafes, libraries, not many of those. And it's just that, I would say it's that mixed use. And loneliness is a big issue, and it's not. And I suppose I'm thinking about the elderly. It's not just about the elderly. It's about mothers who perhaps aren't working, who've got single mothers with children. It's a whole range, and also people working from home as well. I think we need to have those sort of areas where people can go and drop in, log on in a cafe or wherever, and continue to work.
Thank you for the talk. It's quite inspiring. That comes from an architect. What you've talked about has been really encouraging. And I'll just underline the things that you've said that have been inspiring. So the fact that what do planners do well? You plan. Unfortunately, you can be sidelined so often just to get drawn into regulation and achieve numbers. Actually, what planners do well is plan. It's that creative thinking. It's the problem solving. It's being creative. And it's trying to seek out those quality decisions rather than necessarily just achieving numbers. So I suppose that, and the question is, how can we achieve that more? I suppose I think when you first thought about becoming a planner, what was it about planning that inspired you? What drew you into that? And how can we bring that through into the profession?
I think I don't know, I didn't fall into planning. I was always going to be a planner, and I don't know why. It was just something that it was something that I decided I was going to do. But and it has changed significantly since I went into planning. But I don't know. I would say it's really. If I was a planner, I would want to go home and think I've done a good job, and actually I've given the time and the effort in terms of the decision making, those recommendations, and actually talking to neighbours and talking to the community. And what I don't want to be doing is thinking, oh God, I've got to get back, you know, and not. And so a lot of it for me is because I actually genuinely like people, and I don't mind confrontation. But what I do like, and I don't mind being challenged, and I do like to try, and it's something that I always did when I was working in the local authority, is try to get the person I'm talking to see my point of view, or to see a different point of view, and actually understand why decisions were made. And if I had to sit there for an hour, 2 hours, I remember once somebody came in to see me at 5 o'clock, and I thought, he's coming at 5 o'clock because he wants a quick decision and he wants me to just say, yeah, do it. I think I was there till about 8 o'clock that night. And that's just because it was a frank discussion around actually what you can and can't do. And quite often we try to get, browbeaten into it. And it's just, it's using those softer skill sets, listening. I think most people want to be listened to. And if they feel they've been listened to, but then there's a decision has gone a different way, then actually they're more accepting of it. But they just want to be heard, I think. And I don't know if we as a profession have actually moved away from that, and we don't have that resource. I think we care. I think we want to do it. I just think we are given so many additional tasks to do that we've lost our way. We are public facing, and that's where we should be, and that's where we should be putting our resources in, and that might then change how people perceive us and their understanding of what we do.
Thank you very much. It's been great to spend time with you today, and for you to enjoy our slightly damp island, so sorry about that. I think you're right. One of the challenges is that we can have visions of what we're expecting through a planning process. We have an interpretation of the drawings we approve, and then there's a huge disappointment when we get out there. And my question, it happened with the Jersey Design Awards. We were looking at a particular property. We'd worked really hard on the design. I think I can call it funky. And when we got out there, instead of the zinc roof that had been specified, it was GRP. And it completely killed the project. And it was such a shame. And I suppose one of the things is, how do we engage as planners? We can't solve the problem. But how do we engage as planners to ensure the quality and the aspiration of what the community will enjoy at the end of the process?
It's a hard one, isn't it? And I would say there needs to be a relationship with building regulations. So actually, whatever's submitted under building regulations, I don't know about the process here. In the UK, they can either go through the local authority or they can go through private building inspectors. But wherever possible, to actually try and have that relationship with the building inspectors, so that when they are out on site, or when the full plans notice, whatever it's called, is submitted, that there's actually some resemblance, or it reflects exactly what's approved. And unfortunately, I think you might have to make an example of a few people and actually take it all the way, because that's the only way the message gets out there, which is, and if it's fundamental to actually that design principle, then I'd do that. And I just think be brave and do it. Because once that is in the press, no matter how they would report that, then actually that's a painful message. So woe betide.
You heard it here first, people.
Thank you, Lindsay. It's really nice to have you here. I actually saw you a couple of months ago in Brighton.
You
at
did,
the
you did.
ICN, yeah.
At the consultants.
So welcome to Jersey.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, the profession, it's a really difficult thing. I've been a chartered planner since 1990. And I think there are three main issues to do with that. And I think, firstly, we're quite a young profession relative to other professions.
Thank you.
Obviously, the turn, sort of the turn of the last century. And so we don't have quite the same kudos as other professions. That's sort of my experience over the years I've been working. Secondly, as individuals and collectively, we're not assertive. And you talked about the word shouting. We need to shout, and I don't think we've done that enough. And then thirdly, we deal with subjectivity. And people can't deal with that. You know, we have to balance decisions, and most professions, it's binary, or, you know, it's one way or the other. And I think the public have that perception of us as well, and I think those are sort of the three fundamental issues that we face, and they're really difficult to overcome. So I don't know what question I have, but it's just the experience I have.
I'll turn it into a question. I'll turn it into a question. I think, I think the issue around the last point you made, and I think that's around decision making, and I think there is something here around planners having confidence and being empowered. And I think this perhaps goes back to the politicalisation in a way, and I'm not saying it's here, in the UK it is. And we have cases where our members maybe get involved unnecessarily or at the wrong stage. And I think, and I think also there's quite often an issue because planning is subjective and consideration. So, you know, you get instances where you've got a young planner who then, as the application or whatever it is, goes through a process, there's a lot of consideration and a lot of different opinions put in. And that really undermines somebody's confidence when that happens. So I think, you know, there's an issue here. There's an issue here for me, which is hybrid working. And I think it's right that we've got a balance. But I do think we need to remember that actually our young planners need that support, and they need that guidance, and they need those conversations. Now, that can be done online. I heard earlier this week where there are surgeries, you know, same as you would have by the water cooler conversation, which is, what do you think about this? Just looks absolutely rubbish, doesn't it? Or you can have those online, but it has to be the young planners, and actually, not even just the young planners, but actually those in a more senior position, need to be able to have those sort of conversations and surgeries and thoughts around actually what do we think about this before it gets too far into the process. So it's a difficult one. I don't know if we will ever overcome it. The more guidance that a local authority or a committee or whoever planning department produce helps, and actually if that is stuck to and that's promoted, that's really positive. And I know you have a lot of guidance here in Jersey, and that's to be welcomed. And I think that's the other thing around design codes. The design codes I've worked with are sort of, you know, they're written in a way of saying you could, you should. Some of them, you know, some sentences are you must. And it can be interpreted in very different ways. So it's being clear what you really want and actually sticking to it. So those changes down the line where I talk about, you know, we've got a big fat blancmange, and actually when it's value engineered, it ends up as a flat pancake down here. That's not happening. And actually it needs to stay here. And I think, you know, those schemes, when a young planner actually delivers something which they're proud of, and it actually is as per approved, that's great. And that builds confidence. It is about empowering and giving confidence. I've just been always very bolshy during my career. You'd never wanted to work with me.
Thank you. A
think from my personal experience, and maybe some of the others as well here, the relationship of the public and applicants with planners can often be quite confrontational, and that's a shame. I know Andrew, Rebecca, Tracy and other members of the team have done a lot to engage with the construction industry, with the applicants, architects and the like, and that's broken down a lot of barriers and been really positive. I just wondered from your experience, UK context, whether there's other tools, tips and tricks that from an applicant architect side, but also from the planning side, is there anything that can improve that relationship and help development, planning, applications be run in a less confrontational manner? And also I just wanted to ask directly, do you as a presidential level work with your RIBA and RCS equivalents?
Yes, yeah, we do. We have, I have regular meetings with the RIBA president. I can never pronounce his name. Mawari. And also the RICS. And we get together actually as built environment sector very, very regularly. And I also get together with, on Teams calls of course, with the Australian, the New Zealand, the Canadian and the American president as well. And they have similar issues to what we're having around housing crisis and delivery. So I don't know if that's reassuring or alarming, I'm not quite sure. Sorry, you were asking, oh yes, about, I think that those relationships, I suppose I'll have to question, do they have to be confrontational? Because in fact, you know, if you're working together over a period of time, then actually surely you build up a trust of each other. You understand where individuals are. And you should be able to have robust conversations between each other and not take offence. And I always used to say to my young planners, it's much better to be upfront early on. And if you've got real concerns, say it early on, because actually it gets more painful and more difficult later on. So that might be difficult to say and it might be difficult to hear, but do it early and just be open and honest. Now, that might generate confrontation, but ultimately, those planners are trying to save you time, save you money, and actually potentially embarrassment later on with your client if you went back and said, oh, everything's fine. So those young planners, and also the senior planners, all of us, we need to be in a position where we can say, actually, there are parts of this which I'm really concerned about. And then it's, for me, it's right, what are we jointly going to do about that? Because it's a joint team effort to get a planning proposal to something which is shaped up, which actually everybody's comfortable with.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And perhaps it's just